value is there for us of having economic freedom, right? Okay. We have not yet learned how to live forever. However, there has been a huge increase in life expectancy over the past few years. My understanding of history is that Bismarck, the tyrant of Germany, in the late 1800s wanted to curry favor with the populace, so he offered a pension to the aged. But before making that offer, he had his actuaries analyze the country and determine an age for becoming pensioners such that the actual cost to the treasury would be nil. So when the actuaries came back, they said 65 would be a great age because there are so few people still alive. And that, as I understand it, is the way that we now have 65 as our age of retirement and age of pension. Nobody, however, these days expects to only live to age 65. Average life expectancy is closer to 80. Can we live longer, and more importantly, can we live into older age with great health? There is a huge amount, a growing amount of information showing that this is in fact possible. One of the books excuse me, written on the subject was written by Ray Kurzweil, the great inventor, works at Google, helps them in their thinking, and Terry Grossman, a doctor from the Denver area with whom I've taught at several conferences. They wrote a book called Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever. Live long enough to be able to live forever. Their premise is that technology providing for a longer and healthier life is growing so fast that if you can just stay alive for another 20 or 30 years, you'll likely be able to live, quotes, forever. For those interested in living long enough to see the day that Kurzweil and Grossman envision, you'll love hearing our next speaker, Dr. Jonathan Wright. Within the medical world that is interested in such things, Dr. Wright has long been one of the foremost teachers. He's the guy who can give you the practical steps to live a healthy and active life into old age. Jonathan is world recognized as one of the most knowledgeable in the field. We are fortunate to have him here with us today.
Well, that's very kind of Dr. Wilkinson. Rick is actually the one who arranged this, and the discussion, or talk I should say, that I gave on Wednesday about how to, among other things, cut your risk of heart attack and stroke by some 80-something% without changing your diet or taking any pills or anything. That actually works. There's a medical study on it, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be technical, and when there's a study, put that up, but we'll go through really quick. I don't expect everyone to be as impressed as the physicians are when it's in the Lancet or the New England Journal or those kind of places. All right, however, there is something that has been working for hundreds of millions of years, and that we are part of it. It's called nature. And if we are going to stay as healthy as we can for as long as we can, then it's super simple. All we need to do is copy what nature does. Now, what I'm saying there is that if we have a certain machine and it's broken, do we get parts for that machine? Or we get parts that don't fit that machine? All right. Our bodies are made up of nature's molecules. Let's see. Now here I'm not talking about protons, neutrons, and electrons. Let's go to the next stage. They're made of proteins and carbohydrates and fats and essential fatty acids and a whole lot of other natural stuff. But you know there isn't one molecule of a patent medicine, which is also called sometimes a drug. But I prefer to call them what they are, because you see we cannot patent nature's molecules by law. Therefore, if we're going to make megabucks, we have to patent something. So what scientists are in the very bad habit of doing, and this has been going on for the last century, is taking a natural molecule and changing it just a little bit so it isn't quite natural, and now we can patent the sucker, and We can afford to pay Los Federales at FDA $1.2 billion, which is what Forbes magazine, not me, says it costs to get approval from FDA. Now, I respect that approval about this much. Have you ever heard the whole thing about, old thing about those who do, they do, and those who can't do, they teach? Have you heard that one? All right, well, those who do, they do, and those who can't do, they teach, and those who can't do either, they regulate. What else have they got to do? They can't do, they can't teach, they got to do something for a living. Yeah, and so they approve, according to Forbes magazine, for $1.2 billion, a molecule that doesn't belong in the human body. What is the point of that? And there's not only some of them that are not very good for people at all. So we not only have to deal now with pollution in terms of patent medicines and all the pesticides and herbicides and whatever sides it is in the food, but also FDA wants you to radiate your food to death so it'll be sterile. You've heard of that, yeah? So anyway, if we copy nature, oh yes, I have a copyright on Copy Nature, US copyright. Little c, copy nature, put it on the publications. If we do that, we're the most likely to stay the healthiest for the longest. Now notice I didn't give any guarantees, but most likeliest to stay the healthiest for the longest. All right, now I'm going to help you believe me a little bit, and my poor wife, she puts up with this from time to time. Those of you who were here to hear me last time, you're not allowed to guess. Holly, would you come on up? She'll be passing out some material in a moment. But now, nobody's allowed to guess. How old is Holly? Nobody's allowed to guess who was at the last session. Anybody else guess how old she is? Any more closer guesses?
Well, I'm actually only 4 years old. Let me tell you why. Because Confucius says life begins at 70. So now you know how old I am. It's 74, so it's all his fault.
Yeah. 74, she started what's called bioidentical hormone replacement at age 50 when menopause occurred. Of course, we've done a few other natural things. I should tell you, if we ever have a chance, about a marvelous Swiss invention called cell therapy. Not stem cell therapy. This one's been around since 1928. And it does a very, very nice anti-aging job. Holly and I take a course of that every 3 or 4 years. She does her bioidentical hormones. And that's the way she's looking at 74. So it's definitely possible, folks. Definitely possible. All right, let's go to what I'm supposed to be talking about here, and that's some of the things that happen to some of us with the passage of time, namely getting deaf or going blind or losing our minds. Aldosterone and hearing loss. Now, for those of you who haven't heard about aldosterone, aldosterone is a hormone that's made in everyone's adrenal glands. And what it's accused of doing is, oh, you're the hormone that regulates sodium-potassium balance in the body. Well, every single molecule in the body has always been accused of doing one thing, and named that. And then we figure out as time goes by that they do 50 things apiece, 60, 70, 80. But we only know them by the one name, and that's sad. I think the whole thing needs renaming. For example, you've heard of that stuff called growth hormone? Yeah, makes you hit too many home runs and get elected governor of California and stuff like that. That's what growth hormone does? Yeah. But also, it's what happens when we're not growing anymore? How come we have a normal level? Because it's a repair hormone. It helps cells to repair themselves. It's one of the biggest repair systems in the body is stimulated by growth hormone. So anyway, aldosterone is not just a sodium-potassium balance thing. Now there, for the few scientists in the group, is one of the original references to Dr. Dennis Troon right here. He's the one who came up with this whole thing in animals, but it works in people. And what he said in his article is aldosterone therapy may offer advantages over prednisone for long-term management of autoimmune hearing loss. Okay, what's that got to do with anything? How many of us have got autoimmune hearing loss? Well, you know, some people are diagnosed that way, but do you know that there has never been found to be an antibody? Never? And if you haven't got an antibody, how is it going to be autoimmune? Well, they named it autoimmune because in some cases of hearing loss that happens suddenly, if you give these people a very toxic molecule called prednisone, why, they can hear again. Well, yeah, but prednisone is rather toxic, folks. Osteoporosis, high blood pressure, it's one of those, it's a tweak of cortisone that tweaked it to be 5 times more powerful and about 20 times more toxic. All right, so here's another one of his references. I'm sorry, another reference that says higher serum aldosterone, and yes, you can get it measured in the bloodstream, you can, correlates with lower hearing threshold. In other words, you can hear when you don't talk as loud if you have higher serum aldosterone. How do you like that? It's a correlation study. Possible protective hormone against hearing loss. Okay, they compared people who had normal hearing and those who had hearing loss, highly significant difference in serum aldosterone. Okay, and now this is Dr. Troon figuring out how it works through something called the mineralocorticoid receptor. That's the one that receives the steroid molecules that regulate minerals. That's all. Okay, so we did some pilot human research at Tahoma Clinic. Oh, I should say, we got this from Dr. Troon, no question. But I actually got the whole blinking idea from a Boeing engineer. I love Boeing engineers. Those guys scour the internet for anything that might help them, and then some of them have the sense to bring it in to talk to a doctor about, and this man did. And he says, I've got autoimmune hearing loss, and this here article says aldosterone might work for me, and I won't have to take that prednisone stuff. Can we try it? And I said, well, thank you very much. Let me read the article. You know, I'll take help from anywhere I can get, particularly if it's natural molecules. And very fortunately, I'd been working with aldosterone in the prior decade through a pharmacy in British Columbia, which is the only place we could get it. So we prescribed some for him. And you know what? The guy's hearing normalized without having to take prednisone. Now remember, he's a Boeing engineer, right? Right. So he had to prove it was working. So he goes off the aldosterone, and his hearing goes away. Okay, went back on the aldosterone, his hearing came back. He went off the aldosterone again, and his hearing went away. Same thing, it came back when he took it. He's an engineer, he's trying to prove it to himself. Well, he went to do it a third time, and you know who put a stop to it? Not me, his wife. She says, dear, you're already deaf in the one ear. You've only got the one ear left that still works. I love you very much, but if you can keep your hearing and yet risk losing your hearing, I'm not going to live with a guy without any hearing if he could prevent it. So he didn't go off his aldosterone. He's been using it since 2004. He's still hearing just as well. Okay, but when we, after that, decided to do some research, it wasn't placebo-controlled or double-blind. We looked for volunteers between these ages, 41 and 79. 125 micrograms, that's a tiny dose, as you'd imagine, micrograms twice a day for 90 days. And we sent people to their ear doctors to do the audiogram, as well as to tell us subjective improvement. Of those 20 volunteers, 10 had objective and subjective improvement. In other words, their audiograms were better, and they thought they could hear better. 3 had objective improvement, but they didn't think they could hear better, and 7 had no change. So 7 out of 20 versus, well, 50% improvement for sure, 3 probable, and 7 had none. So it does not work for everyone, but 50-50 is better than nothing to keep your hearing. Here's the case report of this engineer fellow. He lost his hearing on one side. He was diagnosed as autoimmune, even though nobody's ever found an antibody. In his initial test, we kind of insist on people collecting all the urine for 24 hours because hormones are secreted in bursts and bursts and bursts. And if you get a blood test, you might get a low part or a high part. If you do the urine test, you get the whole thing. And the normal over here, and you can see he's low. Both times he was tried. And he's the fellow who went on the stuff. He got up to this level, which is normal. He needed proof. We went off it 3 times, returned 3 times, and his engineering trials were ended by his wife. Okay, and this is when he, as an engineer, decided to take it 3 times a day instead of twice a day. Oh yeah, his went too high. This is on a low-salt diet. You can go that high, but he was not on a low-salt diet. So anyway, another individual, 57, his aldosterone was so low they couldn't find it. That's in the blood. And then over here, it was repeated, and sure enough, they found a tiny bit. There's a normal range, and he'd lost hearing. He got the aldosterone, increased to twice a day, and he could tell because while he was driving together with his wife in their diesel truck, he could now hear his wife. And prior to that, he couldn't hear her over the diesel engine. Now, I know some guys would prefer that. So don't tell your wives. Okay? But he restored his hearing. And here's a 62-year-old guy with symptoms of tinnitus. But you know what? I'm going to skip through to case 4 just simply because we got a lot of stuff to go over here. This gentleman, though, was 87. He'd been diagnosed with so-called chronic Meniere's disease or autoimmune inner ear disease in 1994. He saw us in 2007, 13 years later. And he came out low, sure enough. Here we go, aldosterone's a treatment again. And his follow-up, his right ear, which is his sort of good one, he got a 35 decibel improvement at the measurement point that the audiologist wanted, 250 hertz. 235 decibel improvement in his auditory discrimination. You know, that's hearing in a noisy room. Auditory discrimination. This kind of discrimination is allowed. I'm from Seattle. We're not allowed to discriminate on anything at all. No, we're not. We have only persons. We have no men and women in Seattle. One wonders how the Seahawks won, doesn't one? Yeah. Okay, so his left ear, which was near useless, he improved there 20 decibels, and his auditory discrimination came up from 3% to 82%. Yeah, with some aldosterone. Okay, now that we know one of the ways not to go deaf, and it's only a 50% chance, folks, what we found, but better than nothing. Let's not go blind. And one of the better ways of doing that is not getting cataracts. Now, there's 2 very, very simple things we need to eliminate from the diet if we're going to not get cataracts. One of them happens to be refined sugar. No kidding. There's a little enzyme in the lens of the eye called aldose reductase. Yeah, I got to throw the fancy terms at you, or the 1 or 2 professionals out there won't think I know what I'm talking about. It's called aldose reductase, and when the sugar goes a little high, it tries to protect the body against getting diabetes by storing some of that in the lens of the eye. Pretty cool, huh? Well, not really. So that's the other, but oddly enough, the second one is lactose, milk sugar. In susceptible families, cataract-susceptible families, leads to more cataract, ultimately. So both regular sucrose sugar and milk sugar. There's a book out there, though, called The Cataract Cure. There's a picture of the old book. I can't read the fine print that says who wrote it, but it's called The Cataract Cure. Oh, yes, it's Dr. Babisayev from Russia. Efficacy of something called N-acetylcarnosine in the treatment of cataracts. N-acetylcarnosine. Now, if you're ever looking around for this stuff, it's in all the natural food stores, the compounding pharmacies, the dispensary for Tahoma Clinic, and no, our Tahoma Clinic dispensary does not sell pot, okay? No. We've had that name for 30 years before cannabis ever became legal in Washington State. Okay, anyway, in the stores it's called Can-C. What could be simpler? C-A-N-C, in case you had a need for any. Okay. Reversing and slowing cataract, progression number 1. 49 folks with early to moderate cataract, double blind. Oh, that's such a poor pun for cataracts, isn't it? Double blind. Yes. Placebo-controlled, 6 months. 26 of them used the 1% N-acetylcarnosine. 13% used a placebo, and 10 didn't use anything at all. In the group that used the stuff, 91% had anywhere from a 7 to 100% visual acuity improvement. Now, this is early to early moderate cataracts. It will not work once we have a dense cataract, I'm sorry. But the early ones, oh yeah, I've worked with a lot of people who have either reversed them or stabilized them. I tell folks, go check with your eye doctor. I'm not an eye doctor. Have your eye doctor tell you if it's stable, but you can see it too. 41% had improvement in visual image, and 0% had worsening of vision. Nobody got worse. This is this stuff called N-acetylcarnosine. It's a totally natural molecule, totally. Won't hurt a thing. In the placebo no treatment groups, 100% got worse in 6 months. That's what happens with cataracts if you don't intervene. Okay, and then he came up with a second study, and it said much the same. 65 older drivers of automobiles, I suspect. Cataracts in 1 or both eyes, same old double-blind placebo-controlled. Placebo group got gradual worsening glare sensitivity, and the Can-C group, significant improvement in glare sensitivity. So, no, I'm not selling the stuff. I'm just telling you it exists. You can get it in your local natural food store. Right. Don't go blind. Glaucoma. Glaucoma is a disease that half the time can be turned around with no patent medications. Notice they said half the time, not all the time. But that's not at all original with me. Not at all original with me. Here's the book, Glaucoma and its Medical Treatment with Cortin. What's Cortin? Why, it's a whole extract from animal adrenal glands. And it was approved by those who approve things in 1930s for general use. By the way, they hadn't isolated cortisol at that time. They being people who isolate stuff. It hadn't been isolated, so it's just a whole extract from animal adrenal glands. That book was copyright 1937, and look, I get very frustrated. There is material that's been in medical journals and in books for close to a century. I'm not kidding you. This thing called cell therapy from Dr. Nihans in Switzerland, which we use at Tahoma Clinic, by the way, that originated in the 1920s. But FDA was protecting us against it until 1994, even though it never hurt anybody. And you can see some of its results with Holly. They were protecting us against it till 1994. We've been using it since then. There's a lot of stuff, and it just lays there, and it doesn't get publicity. And here I go being a, I'm sorry, libertarian politician. Why doesn't the Libertarian Party take on freedom of choice in healthcare as a major issue? Everybody's interested. Democrats are interested. Republicans are interested. I get them mixed up, I'm sorry. They're all interested. Now, I happen to have joined the Libertarian Party 2 years after David Bergland organized the thing. And so I've been a libertarian a long time, and I can't understand why this is not an issue. Okay, you'll find in these handouts a small slip of paper that says on it, Access to Medical Treatment Act, and the URL for it, so you can go read it. And you'll also find Free Speech About Science Act, and the URL for that. Those have been introduced in the last 4 or 5 Congresses. They have what did Mark Twain say about Congress? It's the opposite of progress. Of course. And they have been introduced there for the last 4 to 5 sessions, and they've attracted 50 or 60 sponsors total, and they never go anywhere. But very seriously, folks, if we had, don't we have freedom of speech? Aren't I talking to you? But did you know that if you happen to be a manufacturer, distributor, or supplier of, let's say, Can-C, and you tell people about the science, FDA has written letters to people who do that telling them they're going to come confiscate all of their inventory. There is no free speech about the science of health. It's not allowed, and this is an alleged free country. Yeah, as I say, I do get excited. So anyway, take a look at those 2 bills when you get a chance. Try to persuade your US representatives and congresspersons, and we have to say congressperson in Seattle, of course, to get behind them, and let's see if we can get them moving, because if we had free speech, and if we had free access, which is what the other one is about, it just says you can get any kind of health care you want to if you happen to be an adult, just so the doctor explains all the options, you get to pick one, and if one of them happens to be disliked by FDA, it doesn't matter, as long as you sign the forms. With those 2 things, we would cut the cost of health care by half and have much healthier people within just a few years. We wouldn't have to worry about the abominations care. Okay, well, glaucoma and its medical treatment with Cortin, 1937, by Dr. Josephson, Emmanuel. He's an ophthalmologist, Columbia University affiliated. He makes oh, by the way, you can find his book online at usedbooksearch.co.uk. It's my favorite one. It searches all the English language bookstores, .co.uk after used book search. What could be easier? And it's a couple, $3 online. Anyway, he makes a detail-by-detail case that a significant proportion of all glaucoma has its origin in weak adrenal glands. Got nothing to do with eyeballs. It's got to do with weak adrenal glands. So what did Dr. Josephson do? He documented that injection of adrenal cortical extract, which was called at the time ACE for adrenal cortical extract, or Cortin, in many cases dramatically reduced intraocular pressure, frequently to well within the normal range. About half of glaucoma is what's called an ocular manifestation of an adrenal problem. It is not an eye problem. I said half, not all. Get whacked in the eyeball and you get your eyeball messed up, that'll give you glaucoma too. It's got nothing to do with your adrenal glands. Okay, so I've made personal observation of how well this works. Before and after intraocular pressure, I made sure, please, you see your ophthalmologist, you get your pressure measured, you come over to our clinic, we give you the shots, you go back to your ophthalmologist and get your pressure measured. I'm not going to measure the pressure. I'm not an eye doc. I'm treating the adrenal glands. This stuff was used from the 30s through the 70s with good effect and no harm done at all. Los Federales at FDA then declared it illegal because they said it was ineffective. Yeah. Basically what had happened is prednisone and Decadron and that kind of, excuse me, garbage. We do not need it. We could always use high-dose cortisol if it's an emergency. Anyway, those companies, you know how the pharmaceuticals and the Federales are all tied in together? Yeah, and they persuade Los Federales to get rid of stuff they don't like. Yeah. Have you all heard of the Fitzgerald Report? Please put Fitzgerald Report 1953 into your search engine sometime. What will come up is a report to Congress by Benjamin Fitzgerald, who was commissioned. He was investigator for the Interstate Commerce Commission, by the way, by Senator Charles Tobey to look into the collusion between Los Federales at FDA and the pharmaceutical industry. And in that report, which is available online, he had proof in 1952 and 1953 of collusion between those two agencies to wipe out natural medicine. It's in the Fitzgerald Report. To the Congress, no less. And nobody's heard of that one either. Okay, so they took it off the market because it was ineffective. Now, macular degeneration is something we can deal with too, but before I get there, I want to repeat, I'm not an eye doctor. I tell people that the eyes are under a lot of oxidative pressure. It's, you know, the light. They get a lot of exposure, and yet it's not skin, which can be tough. By the way, folks, don't fall for the nonsense about sunscreens. That's just a good way to get vitamin D insufficiency and die of something prematurely because you don't have enough vitamin D. An Israeli scientist wrote a wonderful paper pointing out that if you happen to be Greek and you live in Greece, you have a 3 per 100,000 chance of getting melanoma. If you happen to be Greek, relatives of those same Greeks, and you move yourself to Australia and you eat the average Australian diet, 36 per 100,000, a 12-fold change. And then what this professor, what she did, was to go line by line through the Mediterranean diet, showing all the things that protect us against UV radiation that are in the Mediterranean diet. And that's how come they have 3 per 100,000 in Greece, and it's sunscreen deficiency is the point. It's a deficiency of lycopene, which is the red stuff in tomatoes and watermelons. It's a deficiency of stuff in olive oil. It's a deficiency of all the stuff that's in a good natural diet. And if you want to pick on one thing, pick on lycopene, folks. That stuff really is a protector against UV damage to the skin. And then on top of that, you just go get some Retin-A. If you're a free citizen of Mexico, you can walk into the store and buy Retin-A. No, not being a free citizen in Mexico. We've got to pay some doctor to prescribe it, and it costs 35 bucks a tube as opposed to $7 a tube in Mexico. This is stuff for kids' acne. And some other researchers found that after sunshine exposure, not before, please, at bedtime, you rub in the Retin-A. It heals the DNA that's been damaged. Seriously, that's researched. So we just take a bunch of lycopene. You can get it down at the health food store, put the vitamin A on. Yeah, you're not going to get melanoma. And you don't have to have toxic sunscreens on you. But back to not going blind. Okay, macular degeneration. Oh, yeah, that's actually me. Published an article there in 1990 on how to turn around macular degeneration. Yep, okay. We've been able to arrest at Tahoma Clinic, help arrest, or in the majority of individuals treated, reverse the progression. One lady comes in, she can barely read a billboard standing in front of it. When she's all done, she can now read the billboard at the usual distance. That's a better than usual improvement, but she got an improvement. We can arrest, or in the majority of cases, reverse macular degeneration. What's our odds? 70% for arrest or reversal, 30% we're not going to get anywhere. And that's what we accumulated over time. And the visual improvement is always, always, always measured by independent ophthalmologists. It's not measured by us. Oh, well, I should say a little bit more about that then. Turns out that macular degeneration is 70% of the time a manifestation of nutrient malabsorption. It's a gut problem. It's not an eye problem. And we're not digesting and absorbing the food well enough, and we don't absorb enough of it to get to the eyes. And so since the eyes are under the most UV and other assault all the time, they fall apart first, which is where I got off on the skin. It takes the skin a while longer to fall apart. According to Mayo Clinic, Mayo Clinic in 1932, no less, Dr. Van Zandt, by the time we all happen to be, 60, half of us don't make enough acid in the tummy to fully digest breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if we don't do that, we don't get the nutrients digested out, and if they're not digested out, they're not going to be absorbed. We check everyone who comes in with macular degeneration for low gastric acidity. The large majority have low gastric acidity. What do you do about it? Well, you just go down to the health food store and they got replacement hydrochloric acid capsules and you take them. Because it's like replacing hormones. I'm sorry, after menopause, are the ovaries going to come back? Well, we're going to need much better technology than we got now for that. So if they're not, we got to use bioidentical hormones, and if the stomach has decided it's time to slow down, we just replace the stomach secretion. The other one happens to be something we're seeing a heck of a lot more of, hidden gluten sensitivity. Now, gluten doesn't interfere with digestion. It just puts up an iron barrier to the absorption of iron and a lot of other minerals and to amino acids. And we look for a hidden gluten sensitivity with everybody with macular degeneration too. And we add those two things up, the low stomach acid and the hidden gluten sensitivity, that's 70% of the people we see, and those are the people who get better. Because we know all we got to do is plug in an IV and put in all the nutrients they haven't gotten in for the last few years, and the eyeballs know how to repair themselves if they just are given the right, correct material. Okay, so now let's try to not lose our mind. Now, for one thing, that means not getting elected to Congress. Which is probably why there are not very many libertarians in Congress. Okay, several topics. I'll go quick on preventing Alzheimer's. Folks, it is flat out proven under the microscope that testosterone prevents Alzheimer's in a very significant proportion for men, and estrogen prevents it for ladies. Now, how the heck does that work? Well, some scientists at Rockefeller University figured it out for us, and they published it in a medical journal in the late 1990s, and there it lay, and nobody paid any attention to it because we can't make a synthetic analog of testosterone. Oh, yes, we can, but when we did, in the early 1950s, it was called, what, methyl testosterone? A lot of guys got cancer from it. Yeah, 50 years before the Women's Health Initiative. A lot of guys got cancer from the artificial testosterone, so they dropped it really quick. Okay. So anyway, what they do, they rounded up brain cells from people in their 50s who died of trauma, not of what I want to say, neurologic decline, some kind of trauma, car wrecks and so forth. And they put the male brain cells into a culture dish and the female brain cells into a different culture dish, and they watch the accumulation of the garbage that accumulates with macular degeneration, with Alzheimer's disease. It's called tau protein, beta amyloid, neurofibrillary tangle. You've all heard the words probably. Okay, they watched it accumulate under the microscope. It accumulated at a certain rate. Okay, then they put into the male container, they put in what they called, very carefully, they specified as a physiologic amount of testosterone. Now, physiologic means the amount that belongs there. Not enough, again, to get us elected governor of California or hit too many home runs or anything like that. Just the amount that belongs there. And a physiologic amount of estrogen into the female container. Okay, and then they kept looking under the microscope. What the hell? The tau protein and the beta amyloid and the neurofibrillary tangle were being accumulated at 10 to 15% the rate they were before. It cut down the accumulation of intracellular garbage out how much? That much. They even figured out how it works. And this is one place where, I'm sorry, techies, but garbage in and garbage out is good for us. Because what they found out is that without that testosterone or estrogen, you might call it the head of the janitorial crew, an enzyme that organizes the cleanup of all that stuff out of the cells, didn't work. So that intracellular garbage is actually something we all produce at all stages of our lives. But if we're healthy and we got plenty of testosterone, plenty of estrogen, it just gets swept out, swept out, swept out. You know, all cells take in nutrients, put out materials that shouldn't be around there. And so this just keeps the sweeping out at a normal rate. Garbage in, yeah, garbage back out again with testosterone and estrogen in your brain cells. Yes. And that's why epidemiologic studies like the Princeton's Men studies have shown that, let's see, guys who have the highest testosterone at age 60 are least likely to get Alzheimer's, and guys who have the lowest testosterone are most likely to get Alzheimer's. And the same thing goes for ladies. That's been studied for women too. Testosterone and estrogen. So when a guy comes in and says, I think my testosterone's declining, the ladies are, I'm sure they're just as pretty, but they don't look that way to me. What's going on with me? I'll say, let's refocus a little bit. Yes, testosterone is important for sex life, and estrogen is too, but if you can't remember what you did with who, what the hell difference does it make? So let's focus on the important thing first, and then we can have fun with that too, yeah. So do consider, not only for looking 40 or 50 when you're 74, but also for keeping all our marbles. Consider when the appropriate time comes getting the testosterone and estrogen checked and maybe acting on it. Bioidentical hormones are just as safe as our own hormones were when we were younger. I didn't say they're safer, did I? Of course not. There's a few women who get breast cancer in their 30s. There's a few guys who get prostate cancer when they're young. But they are just as safe because they are exactly the same. And if we know what measures to take, we can make them safer. Seriously, there's a lot of natural things we can do to cut risks of cancer. Okay, let's go on to lithium. Now that one sometimes has a bad reputation because lithium is known to be used for bipolar disease. Okay, got an easy for you to answer a bad joke. What do you call a bear that spends its summer in Antarctica and its winter in the Arctic? Come on now, that's easy. It's a bipolar bear, of course. Yeah. That joke was so bad, the screen went off. There. Okay, I think I mentioned that. And there's the basic science I was talking about. That's, if you ever want to read that basic science on garbage in, garbage out, there it is. And here we go with lithium. Okay, now, lithium at very low doses will accomplish this. The dose you can buy in your local natural food store, I'm serious, you can get between 20 and 5 milligrams per capsule. They've got 5s, they got 10s, they got 20s. To get toxic on lithium, any of us would have to go past 80 milligrams a day, so don't go there. Don't go there. But 5, 10, 20. I personally have been using lithium 20 milligrams a day since the year 2000. And no, I'm not bipolar, except Los Federales think I am, but that's another story. Okay, now why have I been doing that? Well, it turns out, here comes this study in The Lancet, which is a really good medical journal. What they did was round up people who volunteered to have MRI scans. We've all heard of MRI scans, scan the old brain and stuff. And they scanned all these people's brains, and then they had them all take lithium, and then they scanned all their brains again a few months later. Oh my God, they had 3 to 4% new gray matter. Hercule Poirot would be impressed. That many more little gray cells. And remember, that's literally millions and billions of cells. They're little tiny things. In just a few months on the average. And I thought, I can use all the brain cells I can get. So I've been taking this stuff ever since then. But since then, there's been this enormous explosion of lithium research. And it's come to the point where lithium, a novel treatment for Alzheimer's disease, Lithium Review reveals that lithium is very likely to dramatically reduce Alzheimer's disease risk. When something is new in science, they'll always put a question mark on it and say, is it a novel treatment? If they leave the question mark off, they're being too brash and bold is what it is. And what these people do is they go through all of the ways in which lithium can prevent Alzheimer's. One of them, lithium stimulates BCL protein. Duh, what's that? I didn't know either. I'm not a neurologist. BCL protein is the stuff that leads neurons to divide. Pretty cool. And lithium stimulates them. And here's another study from Japan. Over 1 million people in this thing, where they checked the groundwater. And remember how much lithium is going to be in groundwater? Not very much. They checked the groundwater for lithium content. The more lithium in the water, the greater the longevity. The less lithium in the water, the less longevity. Lithium protects in experimental animals brain cells against any known neurotoxin. I am not kidding. I've actually read all this stuff. And speaking of reading all this stuff, a colleague of mine, Dr. Alan Gaby, and I have been giving seminars in nutritional medicine, and then separately, I do bioidentical hormones ones with Dr. David Rosensweet. Since 1983, the two of us, starting back in the 70s for me and the early 80s for him, have accumulated over 70,000 copies of medical journal reports. We've actually read all of them, except he's read some and I've read some. We agreed we didn't want to read all 70,000. Lithium-mediated protection against ethanol neurotoxicity. Now the guys, mostly guys, and some of the ladies who I talk to who just don't want to stop Saturday night partying, they all tell me that if they just take their lithium every day, that their hangovers are substantially less now after the same party that gave them a larger hangover. Doesn't matter what the neurotoxin is, somehow lithium is able to protect against it. That's very important. Okay, so lithium will cut your risk of Alzheimer's. Testosterone and estrogen, gender-specific, will cut your risk of Alzheimer's. And here comes turmeric, which we've all heard of. It actually happens to be the curcumin molecule inside of the, or it's 80% of the turmeric. Some Indian research scientists noticed that there were certain provinces in India where hardly anybody was ever reported to get Alzheimer's disease. What's going on here? Basically, they tracked it back to the turmeric consumption. There were provinces in which turmeric was thrown into everything in the cooking. And then somebody got even smarter, I guess, and tracked it down to the curcumin fraction of the turmeric. So you can buy expensive little curcumin capsules, or you can just keep a 5-pound thing of turmeric next to your stove. That's what Holly does. I gotta admire her. She is so thrifty. She goes to the Indian spice store and buys 5 pounds at a time and just throws it into everything, because neither one of us wants to get any Alzheimer's. And actually, I think it tastes good. So there's the one you can do without even needing a doctor. Yeah, you need a doctor for the testosterone estrogen prescription, but turmeric? Thanks. Okay, this is just something that I can leave off, which I will, but thought you might like to know, rubidium can reverse severe clinical depression. Rubidium is a mineral in the sodium, potassium, lithium family. And what this is going to follow is of 6 different studies showing that in 2/3 of cases, rubidium was able to help people be discharged from hospital, people who were in there with severe clinical depression. They were given rubidium by the European investigators, and they are out of hospital, not depressed anymore, in a month. That's 2/3 with rubidium. And rubidium is another one of nature's tools. It's one that they had to use that more than nature usually does, but still they did. Now, Dr. Wilkinson is telling me it is almost time for me to shut up here. So I guess I better. And let's see, there's a thing there we can do a few questions. Just because if you want to stay for questions and you don't mind missing some lunch, please do. But there you go. Rick, you can probably answer some of this stuff too. Please come on up. Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed your presentation. I'm a physician specializing in pathology and neuropath.
All right.
I was very interested in your dementia discussion. There are alternatives that people can take, since I've studied dementia for the last 35, 40 years.
All right.
You can take DHEA.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a precursor to testosterone. And women have lower doses of testosterone as men have lower doses of estrogen. And women typically take 25 milligrams, and men take 50 milligrams of DHEA. It's harmless. It has no side effects that I'm aware of, and I've been taking it over 10 years. And it gives you healthy bones, it gives you stronger muscle strength, and it helps prevent some of the problems that you addressed as far as the dementia.
You bet. And if I could bring just one little note on that, please, folks, don't swallow DHEA. Rub it on. I can always tell when a guy's swallowing DHEA because we'll do the 24-hour urine test, and his estrone is always much higher than a guy's estrone it ought to be in the urine. Well, the way our bodies handle DHEA, it comes from the adrenal glands, and it goes through smaller blood vessels to bigger veins all the way to the heart first, and then the heart distributes it to every cell in the body, and then a little bit gets kicked out by the liver every time the blood goes past. When we swallow that stuff, 100% of it goes to the liver first. Liver says, what am I going to do with all of this? And so apparently it turns it into too much estrone for guys. It's not going to bother ladies that much. But a lot of it is lost, and this is known in medicine, as the doctor will tell you, as first-pass metabolism. So with DHEA, you can get a doc to prescribe a cream, a so-called rub-in cream, and those rub-in creams, when we check the 24-hour urine, they don't raise any guy's estrone at all. And I won't bother you with further details, but there's details about how to apply it and stuff, but I strongly recommend you think about the rub-in rather than the swallow, but I gotta concur 100% with what was said about the DHEA effects, no question.
It's a good precursor molecule. It's not testosterone, doesn't have
Right.
side effects.
Right.
And because it's a normal metabolite in human physiology, it's okay.
That's right.
But do it under the care of a physician.
There you
have
go.
your blood test, monitor those hormone levels.
There you go. One other thing about DHEA, ladies, the stuff is zetogenic. You ever heard that word? Come on, zetogenic, it gives you zits. If you take too much. So I can always tell the ladies when they ask, how much DHEA should I take? I'll just say, well, just keep increasing your dose till you get that zit, then you back off, and that's what you should take. And it works. Doesn't do that for guys, darn it. We haven't got that guideline. Yes, sir.
I just have one question for the good doctor. Did you marry?
That'd be him.
Well, did you marry a younger woman?
No, sir. I was smart. I read the books that said you want to look for a lady who's a little bit experienced, you know? Yeah. So I'm coming up on 70, sir, but she's 74. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, I've been hearing a lot about intermittent fasting lately, and I was wondering if you had an opinion on that, especially related to growth hormone and testosterone.
Okay, well, if you want to relate to growth hormone and testosterone, I would suggest very highly intermittent interval training. The people who do intense exercise, and I do mean intense to where they're all worn out, and they do that 3 times a week, have the highest levels of growth hormone that I have seen in anybody who wasn't taking growth hormone. And I'm sorry, but it beats fasting even, the intense interval training type of exercise.
How do you get rubidium?
Rubidium. Okay, let's see. Our clinic dispensary will sell it to healthcare practitioners only, simply because you could overdose on rubidium. So we'll sell it to healthcare practitioners who know how to use it. So contact Tahoma Clinic Dispensary if you're a healthcare practitioner. Other than that, there are no other sources in these United States. It is prescribable in Europe, too. You can get it there.
Does anti-aging systems have it?
No, anti-aging systems doesn't yet have rubidium.
Are you able to come up with a quick summary of recommended supplements or things that you want people to add to their diet, such as turmeric?
Well, I'll start, and then I'll ask Dr. Wilkinson to add some to it. Us doctors are always adding supplements to people's lists if we're into this. But there's 2 really basic things that nobody should be without, and those happen to be vitamin C and vitamin D. Now, vitamin C, because if you look in your textbook of pediatrics, should you have one, or textbooks of genetics, what you find out is, good grief, scurvy is a genetic disease, and that all of us have the first 3 enzymes to make vitamin C. It's 3 out of 4. We have the first 3. All of the other animals, your dog, your cat, your elephant, if you got one, any other animal, can make vitamin C. And it's when it's presented with any stress, whether it's emotional stress or biochemical stress or traumatic stress, whatever the stress is, the vitamin C made by the liver, by the way, goes way the hell up, and it stays way the hell up until the stress is over. We need lots of vitamin C to fight just about anything, viruses and chemicals and all that. Well, people and primates, monkeys, chimpanzees, and I don't mean the archbishop when I say primate, although the archbishop is human too. I don't mean to downgrade him. Cannot make their own vitamin C. It's a genetic lesion. So we should be taking vitamin C every day and more when we're under stress. Everyone, 100%, even little babies. Of course, mom takes the vitamin C when she's nursing, but other than that, the little kid should be given vitamin C. How much? Okay, well, there's this thing that Linus Pauling taught us all. He says you can determine it yourself. You start with, just for example, if you're an adult, 1 gram twice a day. Did you get loose bowels or diarrhea? Nope. So go to 2 grams twice a day. Did you get loose bowels or diarrhea? Nope. Go to 3. And when you get loose bowels or diarrhea, that's too much. Your body is not accepting it, and you just back off to the biggest dose you can take. But what you'll find, people tell me this is true every time, is they can usually take, let's just say, 2 grams twice a day. But when they're coming down with something, oh my goodness, they can take 20 grams before they get any loose bowels or diarrhea. The body just goes and sucks it up. So anyway, a person can determine their own dose for that. And I like stuff where you don't need your doctor, and you're not going to kill yourself with vitamin C ever. We like to be there for things that are complex, that, yeah, you got to go study on. But there's so many simple measures we can keep ourselves healthy with. And the second one is vitamin D. Now, if you happen to live in the tropics, and you get out a fair amount, but you don't burn yourself to death, your vitamin D blood level is going to be between 60 and 100, what's called nanograms per deciliter. And by the way, nobody ever died of vitamin D toxicity in the tropics. I guarantee you that. Nobody ever did. Okay, what happens when we measure the average North American? University of Arizona did a wonderful study. They asked for people living within 50 miles of Tucson. 3/4 of them were below the tropical optimal, living in Arizona. So most of us, as adults, have to take at least 5,000 units a day to stay there. Now, why would we want to take that vitamin D? Because, remember, we're dealing with copy nature, and people seem to have originated in the tropics and migrated out a long time ago, our ancestors. So we're accustomed to that. I mean, after all, why were Adam and Eve wearing fig leaves anyway instead of clothes? They didn't need clothes. Sunny, nice and warm and everything. So we should get that same amount that the species was created in or was evolved in, whichever you'd like. That's vitamin D. So those are 2 basics, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wilkinson for what you'd like to add to that.
I would agree with those. Vitamin D is something that can be great for people who have back pain. I see all the time people with low back pain, different kinds of back pain. Back pain just disappears. Even the American Family Practice Association Journal had an article on this a few years ago showing that people taking vitamin D could take care of back pain. Lots of other aches and pains will go away. So the most common things that I would suggest people take tend to be vitamin C and vitamin D. From there, it kind of depends on what's going on. There are a huge number of things that can be helpful for many different issues. Depression, folic acid, or special forms of folic acid. People who have, one of the things about DHEA, there's some evidence I've come across that suggests that if you take it at night rather than the morning, you might get a higher production of growth hormone. And growth hormone is something that some people spend a whole lot of money to increase their growth hormone levels. So if you're going to take DHEA, you might consider taking it in the evening instead of in the morning.
Anybody else then? Well, thank you very much for being here and for going a little late with us. And do tell the organizers, please, please, please,